Make me look beautiful. He can look,
Yeah, I can look sunken, whatever.
You're both looking great.
Thank you.
Luckily, I stay off camera. So, all right. So I think maybe the best thing to do to start might be, Catherine, if you would just provide a little context by giving a brief synopsis of what The Sounding is about.
The Sounding is a feature film that is about a woman who is silent most of her life, and she lives on an island off the coast of Maine. And she's raised by her grandfather, who reads to her voraciously from Shakespeare and Emerson and Foucault. And one day he is reading to her from a book of Shakespeare, and he loses his voice because he's dying. And she picks up the book of Shakespeare and starts to read to him as a gift to him on his deathbed. And during that time, he had brought in a protege of his, a very driven neurologist, a very gifted neurologist, to come and defend her independence when he was gone, in case it ever came into question. And when that neurologist hears her speaking, he thinks that it's a cry for help and brings her to a psychiatric hospital. And the rest of the film is there negotiating that new territory and finding their way towards each other.
Right. So one thing you've said about the film, it deals with a number of themes, but one is the idea of a life force who's kind of an outlier, or an outsider, or someone who's branded the other. Obviously, that's a contemporary hot-button issue with people who, for reasons of ethnicity or culture or religion, are feared by some segment of society. This character of Liv, she's an outlier because of how she chooses to live in society. And there's a reference in the movie to Nurse Ratched. She's sort of like an even purer McMurphy in a way, right? In the way that she becomes this contentious figure in society. No one knows what to do with her. So can you talk about that theme and how you hope to develop it, or what you hope to say about it?
Sure. After she's finished chatting, after she tells us where we should go, of course, yeah. The film is about otherness. It is ultimately, that is kind of where it started from. I'm very, very interested in marginalized people. People who choose to live a marginalized life, or people who have no choice but to live a marginalized life. It fascinates me. I think having started as an actor, and I'm sure I hope Teddy would agree, but that it's, we're deeply curious about human nature, and so that's where my storytelling starts. So in this particular film, it is about a woman who is choosing to live a very extreme form of otherness because it's the most potent version of her life. It's the truest version of her life. And the film is her fight to be able to live that and have somebody understand why she's making that choice. And I do think it's a timely film. I think that we are in a position as a country right now where we are very hungry to connect and need to connect. There's been a huge amount of divisiveness from both sides, from all over. And we have to be able to see another person's point of view. It's part of the reason I think filmmaking is so incredibly important, and all storytelling forms, because they grow empathy in us. And that empathy is what we need to be a community. And I think that is unfortunately something that we saw a diminishment in over maybe the past 5 or 10 years. And I have thoughts about why that is, but it's what I think we need to get back to. And so a film like this, where there's somebody who's choosing this extreme form of otherness, and somebody else who's trying to find their way towards that person, to understand them, and ultimately has to make a choice. How far can he go with empathy? What is the ultimate act of empathy? Making that decision and showing that decision on screen, I'm hoping, will engender empathy in the audience for people who are different. It's also, there is also a really strong element in the film around mental health and mental illness, and that's a huge group of people in the country at the moment. Over the last 10 years, antidepressant use has increased. It's doubled. We have, I think it's 42.3 million people in 2016 that were diagnosed with mental illness. That's 1 in 5. So that community is a community that needs understanding and compassion. And one of the things that inspired the film was Oliver Sacks' writing, and he has an enormous amount of humanity. And in insight into the mind, the human mind. So I do hope that it is a film that's timely. I hope it's a film that's suggesting that we can reach across and see beyond our own sphere and sit in someone else's shoes and understand them, and that it's a worthy act to do that. That empathizing at that level is a worthy act.
Yeah, it just makes us stronger. I mean, to dovetail what you said, makes us stronger as a community, and it's so easy to, I don't know, have it be us and them, and to not understand, not want to understand someone who's different in varying degrees, wildly different, slightly different, and you know, the film, we're looking at it from a medical point of view, particularly, I don't know, my character's involvement with hers, but there is this sort of an attempt to bridge the gap and to unpack and to understand, and I think we all need to do it to be a healthy, functioning society, and even the attempt at empathy, I think, will bring us a long way. But we explore all those themes and more. And I'm going to let you are such a phenomenal, I don't know, speaker, as I stammer over my words, but you have a very eloquent way of I don't know, of getting right to the heart of the matter that I don't think I could have done. That's why she makes a good filmmaker too, because she does it visually as well.
Well, let me ask you, Teddy, about playing this character, this neurologist. He's faced with these conflicting challenges. They're challenges to begin with, but they're also in conflict because he does have these feelings that are developing for the character of Liv, which gets into a professionally, ethically gray area, and he also feels driven to do something. Maybe that's part of his masculinity too, is this need to kind of fix this woman in front of him, or maybe it's his rationality. Well, you tell me, how did you see that? What was driving him?
That's interesting. I never saw it from a male-female point of view, but I absolutely see your point, how it can be sort of this very masculine impulse to fix or to understand or to control. And maybe not understand so much. I think that's sort of a very human thing. We like to categorize and sort so we can understand the thing that's in front of us, which actually, to your earlier point, makes it difficult if we see someone in society we don't quite get, how it can be very scary and how it's very easy to say, well, I don't even want to look at that or deal with that because I don't get it. Mm-hmm. But back to your point, I never saw it as a male-female. I saw it as doctor-patient. But you're right. There is a thing, I think, in Michael that starts to happen. There's a fascination, clearly, but it's not simply a medical fascination. But I think Michael does his best to, whatever might be bubbling under the surface, honestly, to put it aside and have it really be about the patient, for lack of a better word, and to understand this woman. And there's a moment in the film that signals to Michael that this is very serious and she needs care. She needs to be under the watchful eye of someone 24/7, which becomes sort of the divisive moment in the film, that these two characters then attempt to work their way back to one another under those circumstances. It is confounding. It was challenging. It's a conundrum I can't even imagine the professionals in that field face on a daily basis. It almost feels like heroism of the truest form to try to understand and help. And I think that's what Michael was ultimately trying to do, was simply to try to help, but it's not black and white. Right,
yeah, it's clear he has the best of intentions, and yet you could look at the situation and almost say, in a way, this is kind of tantamount to rape or something like that, in the power play of she has a way she wants to live, and he's making choices for her, but it's also a medical situation.
Well, and I think it is one of the things we worked very hard on that I hope communicates is that this isn't a straightforward, it isn't someone, it wasn't, it's curious, I'm interested in your saying that because...
in the sense that rape is considered to be more about power than sexuality.
Sure, but yes, and I completely agree.
Wielding power.
But I don't want to give away too much about the film, so it's hard to talk around.
Right.
Really vague.
Yes.
But there's a inciting incident that I think warrants intervention, and if the audience is able to look at it strictly through what Michael knows.
Right.
See, but the
Yeah.
thing is, of course, and this is the gift of films, is that we can potentially get this sort of omniscient point of view where we know more than the character knows. Right. And so the result is we can say, well, this action would have been better, or this action would have been better, but if you actually look at what the character knows, the actions and the steps that are taken, I would be hard-pressed to know what necessarily might have been better.
Right.
So it's curious because it's very... and also, it's also about who do we empathize with when we sit there and we see it.
Right.
I personally didn't see it in the same way as a power play so much as, in a sense, Michael is struggling against traditional societal needs. He's struggling against, implications around mental illness, mental health, where she fits, can she survive, how does she function? Yeah. Is she safe? Is she okay? Will she be okay? And then what is his responsibility for that? Because, should you draw the line, we had professionals, we were very fortunate to have really wonderful psychiatrists and neurologists advise us on the film, and this is something they talked about, is there is, of course, a very strict code of professional ethics, but there's also the very strong need that got them all into it to begin with, which is the desire to help. Yeah. And for some career psychiatrists, they talk about how the system can beat them down and they can get tired and they stop, they see that line as black and white and they stop caring. And then there are the people who are so committed and so invested, you have to ask, at what point is it more important for them to... I don't want to say, obviously, the professional standards are required, of course, but I don't think those are transgressed in a traditional sense in the early part of the film. And then as things progress, there are motivations for that hopefully the plot unveils.
Right.
But yeah, so it's interesting for me. Also, what's really interesting, too, is it's been predominantly men who have asked me about the male world. The first time I had a comment about this, someone said it's like a modern-day witch hunt. That she's sort of being chased down by these sort of male patriarchs. And I had not initially seen the film that way. I saw it more as a very extreme humanist, a very extreme human being who is living this very different life that is having trouble being embraced for that. But I didn't see her as being hunted, so that's interesting that you saw it that way too. It's fascinating for me.
Well, it was one kind of facet of looking at the prism of the movie that occurred to me while watching it, that, wow, if you look at it from that angle, anyway, that's just another way of looking at it. But,
yeah, it's interesting.
So I don't know if the neurologists that you mentioned were only kind of consulting during the script writing phase, or did you have access, Teddy, to any neurologists or do any research? Or?
No, I didn't. I had secondhand through Catherine. She gave me some Oliver Sacks material. It was, I think by the time we were ready to go, we were pretty close to starting rehearsals. And I was in California, went to New York, and then we just got up and running. We did rehearse for quite a bit, 2 weeks, maybe?
Yeah.
Ish,
yeah,
plus.
We had a really wonderful
That's
rehearsal schedule.
Yeah, which doesn't really
It's,
ever happen. You usually just show up and you get to work. No, but I put 100% of my faith in Catherine and Brian, co-writer. These guys had done exhaustive research. This was your life for up to 5 years prior or something.
Yeah, well, through the progress of the play originally, but yeah.
Yeah. So no, I was in her capable hands, and so that's my answer. I was trying to come up with something else. I was like, looking back, that was it.
So Shakespeare plays a major role, obviously. I'm kind of just curious. Teddy, your path to an acting career was sort of unusual in that. My understanding is you didn't really do theater in high school or college, and so you kind of came late to. I assume your acting training that you eventually did in New York was kind of a stage training as well.
Yeah, exactly. It was at William Esper Studio. It was a 2-year Meisner, and it was a lot of other classes at other studios. But that was sort of the meat and the core of it. But I loved literature growing up. It was the thing I loved most about high school. I took multiple Shakespeare classes where we didn't act the plays out, but we studied the text. I just have always been drawn to language and a love of language, and I guess that dovetails nicely with the field I'm in now. But the Shakespeare element of the script was the thing that jumped off the page for me. The setting is beautiful, the story is complex and interesting, but the Shakespeare element, I just thought, how daring, how bold, how fun, and also the mind of someone who wrote a script comprised, and to create a language cobbling lines of Shakespeare from all the various texts. I was fascinated. I was hooked. So even though my path meandered, and I didn't do any formal acting training until I was in my mid-20s, I don't know, I've always had a great love for it. And
Was this your first time speaking Shakespeare professionally?
Professionally, yes, professionally, yeah. Actually,
Is that at all daunting?
I'm sort of hesitant because, like, to me, speaking Shakespeare professionally involves a stage, and this was like, yes, it's professional, but I was like, yeah, but we were making this great little movie, and I felt safe. I felt safe with Catherine doing it, so it was professionally, but I don't know, the number of plays I've been to at the public or Shakespeare in the Park, it's like I see those guys as the pros, and I'm just trying to keep up.
And Catherine, what was your experience with Shakespeare prior to this project?
Yeah, I'm classically trained as an actor, so I was an actor before becoming a director and writer, and still am acting. And so I have a Master of Fine Arts, and it was a classical degree, so we did modern work as well, but it was a lot of Shakespeare and then also Chekhov and all the rest, which was fantastic. And so I've performed a lot of the plays in his canon and been in love with him forever. I think with the first, aside from Mother Goose and Mickey Mouse, which I played when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade, the first acting job I did was Taming of the Shrew. And I played Bianca, I played the sister, I didn't play Kate, which is a role that everyone says I should play, which makes me wonder what they're seeing exactly. But, and talk about a complicated play to put on now. But a wonderful play, and I fell in love with it, much to the dismay of my family, I think. But I fell in love with it, and now they have also, thankfully. But and so I went on and did I loved the language, and I loved the fact that, I felt really early on what teachers have come to explain to me, which is that if you get out of his way, if you use that language and let it physically manifest in you, it does so much of the emotional work, and you need to have the thoughts, and you have to have clarity around the thoughts. But the emotion is all baked into the sounds, the vowel sounds, and the consonants are all where they need to be. It's kind of shockingly brilliant, actually. And his insights into humanity are timeless, which is why we are still doing him and still obsessed with him. Of course, we're Western culture, and he's a Western writer, and that's not nothing, but it's genius and beautiful, and a great sensual pleasure to say the language. So I did a ton of the plays through that and through my classical work, and then I went on and worked professionally doing those, and classical and brand new plays were my favorite things to do for a long time. So this idea came out of that love of that language.
Total pro. Total pro. I'm an amateur hour next year. Seriously.
Taking notes here.
Taking notes, right?
Next set of interviews.
But who do you people at home recognize?
Started at age 8. Check. Started at 38. Check.
So speaking of language, I want to talk about that's the other sort of uber theme, I think, of the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Language is this vehicle of communication that we all need. I thought it was clever too that the Harris Yulin character is suffering from throat cancer, and there's an implication there that without language, how much of a life can you have, and her being mute and having to kind of find her way back to language in some way. So I guess I just want you to talk about that, reflect on that, what you hope to say about language and communication as well.
Yeah, it's a complex question that is one that, in truth, I still am exploring, and I hope that the audience explores after the film. I'm very interested in language as, for a lot of reasons. Part of the kind of inciting thought behind this was I dabbled in Buddhism, and and I was very interested in the idea, the difference between action and thought, and so in speaking about language, I was interested in that I felt that we as a culture were perhaps starting to get to the point where we were taking language as fact, as real, as actual, not even as fact, but as actual, as action. And the very simple, probably overly used example of that is if somebody says, "I love you." It's beautiful. The language is beautiful. It is, the act of saying it is an act, but the love has to be practiced in a different, that is seen through other kinds of actions. It's not the words, but we take the words as, oh, that person loves me, or oh, this is a fact. And I was really curious about that idea of what if someone chose a language that couldn't be misconstrued as anything other than language. Beautiful in and of itself, but not action, nothing else, you know. And so I thought of what I felt was one of the most beautiful and richest languages, which is Shakespeare's work, and I thought it's so Baroque in some ways, and for some people it can be so impenetrable that in a sense they'd have to see the language first and then interpret through the language what the meaning is, and that made me very curious. I think language can be, the noble pursuit of the human condition is the effort to communicate. And the great tragedy is how difficult that is. And almost impossible, except for those really rare, extraordinary moments where there's a communication that happens, and it's almost never because of language. But the striving, the reaching is incredible. There was a wonderful fiddle player from Ireland, and I'm going to forget his name now, he's amazing, but he did a speech once where he was talking about how the best work that he ever did was learning to play the fiddle in the kitchens of Ireland. And he's played on all the great stages and with all the great musicians in the world. But he said, the reason the kitchens of Ireland taught me more than the best stages and the best musicians is because it's in the reaching for the perfect note that you understand the path there. It's the reaching is where the beauty is. It's not the achievement. The effortlessness and the achievement that comes with all of that work of being an incredible musician is amazing to hear, but the reach is where the human being is, and that's what he loved, and that's what I find really beautiful about language and our desire to reach. However, it's also a great divider. It separates us through, countries. It separates us through religions. It separates us through education. It can delineate and demarcate those things, and so I do think that there is communication beyond language that is more important. The thing that happens under the language,
Subtext
the subtext,
and
also
body language.
Literally the physicality of us being in this room and our desire to talk to each other and to actually just be together. There's more truth in that than anything I can say right now. I'm trying to find my way to communicate, but there's more communication in that connection than anything else I understand. And so that's what interested me about Liv. That's what I think is beautiful about her. She does find her way to language and uses language as a gift of love for as long as she needs that gift of love to the people that she feels need it. But she's not dependent on the language. She's dependent on her ability to make an autonomous choice that's the most truthful for her.
Yeah. In talking about all of that, too, you also remind me of, in acting, it's oftentimes a notion that you can assign an action to the words, right? Like, that's sort of a Meisner thing, right? Yep. There's a book called The Actor's Thesaurus, which is like just all verbs, right?
My sister gave me that.
Yeah. So, obviously both of you could speak to this, but sort of Teddy's turn here. Could you talk a little bit about, obviously, when you're an actor, you're given these words on the page to interpret. I guess what I'm interested to know would be when you feel what you feel you bring as an actor to those words on the page, and what's the best situation for you in terms of what a director can give you, or how you can contribute something special to the material. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think to your first question, I mean, what can I bring? That's potentially a sort of a scene by scene, moment by moment thing, and I don't really know sort of how to answer that, because I don't really know how to classify my own work in that way. But I think I would say, from a director to an actor, the greatest gifts I've been given, besides a fresh pair of eyes and someone who sees intention in me or something in me that I don't see myself. I'm a sponge for notes, directions. I think I'm trying to be as malleable as possible, not wedded to my own ideas, but also for a director to let it breathe, to let us as actors listen and answer honestly. And the greatest part of being an actor, I think, is that wonderful sort of thing that happens between two people who are really sort of listening and really responding from each other. Sort of, again, very Meisner, while the cameras are rolling. There's sort of a great alchemy. There's a great thing that takes place. And a director who can give that room to breathe and let us find it sometimes, and let the sort of the magic of two humans or three humans or four humans, whatever, crystallize and I don't know. I just think that there's such a magic that happens on set, and it's why I love doing what I do much more than I like watching. I'm not really interested nowadays in watching my stuff. It depends on the project, but I often don't. Sometimes I do because I want to see everyone's hard work, and I'm curious about how the thing cut together. But I just love what happens on the day we actually work, and the rest isn't up to me. It's how it's cut together, and it's what takes are used. But it's just such a gift to be able to do. I think I answered your question.
You did.
Okay. I was going off on my own road there for a moment.
Language is working here. It's working.
Right.
It's working for you. So one of the things that's striking about the film is the exteriors that were shot in Maine.
Yeah.
And in reading what I read about where the project originally came from, even before the play version, I think, you were in sort of maybe a similar setting in Vermont, was it?
In Vermont, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you come to shoot the film in Maine, and maybe you could tell that story about what the sort of kernel that began the whole project?
Sure, yeah, my crazy story. So the reason it was shot in Maine was because my grandparents had a house on an island off the coast of Maine, and I was fortunate enough to spend many summers there growing up, and it's an idyllic place for me, a kind of paradise, and it's also inhabited by really extraordinary people. And the area that we ended up shooting in is further north of where my grandparents' house was, but I looked at all of those islands off the coast of Maine for different places to shoot. There's something really unique about the people that live on these islands. The place that I really found it was Cranberry Island. Flock to it. It's one island removed from where my grandparents' house was and where I spent summers. But when you go, it's only reachable by boat. And when you go there, I just understood that, okay, there's two reasons it was shot in Maine. One is because my grandparents had a house there, and the role of Lionel was partially based on my grandfather. So for me, that environment is where I knew him best, and so that's a part of the touchstone there. But the second reason is because when I was creating Liv, and when I was understanding who she was and who Michael is, and how that relationship was going to happen, how an outsider could come in somewhere, and how could somebody actually live silently the way she lived, I wanted to know for sure that it was actually possible. And so I went to Cranberry Island, which is a place that I thought perhaps it was an option. And very strangely, I spent 4 weeks living there silently, camping out, and not talking, and not writing, and not using traditional sign language.
Just being.
Just
right?
being, literally living among the people, the villagers, and the people of the island, and the summer people that came through. And the fishermen there, because it's a lobstering community, they have a very, very different relationship with language. They have an incredible relationship with nature. they don't need conversation for the sake of conversation, and in fact, I don't think they want it. Though they're all wonderful storytellers, they're also incredibly good at silence. And I found from the first day when I walked onto that island and I went into the village store and I was scared as myself, as Catherine, thinking, how am I going to navigate this? And, all those kind of natural fears that come up. And I went in and they were all having their lunch, which was at like 10 a.m. because they'd been up forever. And I went into the store and I was able to point and purchase and sit down with them. And they nodded at me, and I nodded back to them, and they continued their conversation and included me in that circle without my having to say anything. And I thought, this is where she could live. This is a place somebody could exist like this. And of course, village communities are insular, and they take care of their own in a way that's very special. And I'm sure it comes with its own challenges, but again, we're going back to that idea of community. And what is it around communication between people? What is needed there? What's needed for trust? I think sometimes just by nature of the fact that you guys all live on this tiny lump of rock or beautiful forest in the middle of the ocean that nobody else can get to, that's enough, So that's why we shot in Maine. We shot in Monhegan. Teddy came. It was wonderful.
It was dynamite. It was Columbus Day weekend, and we arrived the day that everything was closing down. The only hotel was closing down. The general store was selling off all their stuff at like 75% off. Everyone else was decamping, and we're on that one ferry. That's
one ferry a day.
One ferry a day with the crew, and it was a skeleton crew. But there was something really magical about it. And Maine at that time of year, it was my first time being in October, and the colors are changing there before they sort of change up and down the rest of the East Coast. It was really magical. This very small island, no cars, they do have cars, but no paved roads.
But it is 12 miles out to sea. It's a beautiful, and the community, it's Monhegan in Maine, and the community was incredibly supportive of us. They're gorgeous. There's 35 people, I think, year round, including one child.
Pretty
and
special.
It's amazing. So we were lucky enough to shoot there for the first week for the exteriors. In answer to your question of that story.
Right.
So the way that the kernel of this character was originally created, which was originally for a play, I was living in Los Angeles. I had just gotten there as an actor. I had left the Guthrie Theater where I was a company member and went out to LA to try my luck at the big screen. And I was actually having an amazing time. I loved it, and things were starting to happen for me. And I got a phone call that my mom had fractured her ankle or fragmented her, she had a very bad fall on the ice, and my brother had a real job and a committed life, and my sister was in college, and so I was the natural choice to go home and help her out. So I went back to Vermont, and I thought I would just be there for a few weeks, and 6 months later, I was still there. I had taken a job on a farm to help pay medical bills, and which was a mercy job because I did not belong on a farm. I love nature, but I don't know how to grow things. So that was they were very generous. But I came home one day and I was covered in muck and mud, and I was in my overalls, and my mom and I had dinner, and I helped her to bed, and I just was overcome by this craving to be surrounded by beauty, by poetry, by art, because I didn't have that in that construct for those 6 months. And so I pulled out my complete works of Shakespeare, and I started tearing out all the pieces that I love the most out of it and hanging them on the walls, which sounds totally crazy. I did have other copies of Shakespeare, if that's helpful.
I was just thinking, aren't actors and artists just weirdos?
Totally strange.
No, but not.
And I noticed through the course of doing that there were themes that came out of the writing. There are very strong themes in his writing that I'm not the first person to talk about. But at that moment in time, I did feel like I was seeing connections I hadn't seen before between plays and between pieces of text about madness, about language, about self-realization and authenticity, and about empathy that I thought were really important and sort of kind of speaking to me. And so I began to see a kind of construction of what would it be if someone was actually using this language to communicate about these ideas. And by the morning, it sort of looked like the scene from A Beautiful Mind when he's got all the circles and he's, but he was a genius. And so,
like the twine is like,
I swear there was no twine, but in my head there was.
Yeah.
And so I brought my mom out in the morning to have breakfast, and she was understandably concerned. And she asked if I was okay, and I said everything was great. And then 2 weeks later, I had the very, very beginning of the play. I kept going to work at the farm, and then I would come home, and I kind of created this War and Peace version of the play. And then I shelved it, and my mom got better, and I came to New York, and I met my partner, who's the co-writer of the screenplay, and I told him about the play, and he's a wonderful playwright and writer, Brian Delaney. And he said, I think there's something really special in that idea, and I think you should finish it. And so, at his encouragement, I pulled it out, and I finished it. I turned it into a one-woman show that's very different from the film, but the character and the genesis of the ideas are the same. So.
I'm going to wrap up in a second here, but I do want to ask Teddy, right now, 24 Legacy is unfolding on American television. And prior to that, you had a long stint on The Flash.
Yes.
And those shows, those genre shows, tend to be very twist-oriented.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'm probably not the only person who's curious about, like, when you sign on for those roles, how much you're told or how much you know.
Yeah.
Because as an actor, you want to know the true nature of your character, and sometimes that might be like in 24 Legacy, your character was, at least for a time, and who knows, maybe again, suspected of possibly being one of those famous 24 moles.
Yeah.
So what are you told at the outset, and how challenging might that be?
Sure. So 2 different shows, 2 different things happened. On The Flash, before I took the job, I auditioned for it, got a nice phone call. Hey, they're interested. They want to get on the phone with you. They being the writers. So they, on the phone call, spelled it all out for me. Here's what we're thinking for the whole arc of the season.
Wow.
We're gonna introduce you as this guy, and then you're gonna actually end up being this guy.
Amazing.
And, yeah, right. So it sounded pretty exciting to me. And then over the course of 9 months, we shot it, and it was really, really fun because I got to play both sides, and that was a real gift to be able to do it in one fell swoop. 24 Legacy. Things are not spelled out. In the beginning, we shot the pilot, and then 6 months later, we're doing episode 2 once we've been picked up. The writers met with all of us individually to sort of map out loosely what they were thinking for the season. There were some of those who were going to meet their demise, who were told as much. Some weren't. That things, do evolve over the season. They look at the dailies. They sort of get a feeling of storylines. The network weighs in. A lot of things happen over the course. But 24 is pretty notorious for not telling their actors, and historically, meaning the first 8 seasons, the first run, actors were always asking, like, am I the bad guy? Like, basically to the writers, like, what do you know? Yeah. And the writers, Evan Katz, Manny Cotto, they were telling me about Peter McNichol, always wanted to know, like, am I the bad guy? Am I the bad guy? And either they didn't know or they did know and they just weren't willing to reveal it. Mm-hmm. And that's the case I find myself in now. The first couple episodes, you're meant to think that, this guy's a little moley. This guy's a little, he might be the mole. But it looks like things are, looks like I'm not, but just because it looks like it doesn't mean that I won't open a script one day or get a phone call one day and say, hey, listen, this is what we're going to do. This first season was done and shot, and I'm still alive, and things are A-okay. This being 24, though, and me being the director of CTU, it's kind of like being a keyboarder for the Grateful Dead. It doesn't usually end well,
Yeah, right.
But so far, so good. Everyone in the first 24 met their end, unless you were Jack Bauer or Chloe. So I don't think any of us have any illusions, but we all want to stay on it for as long as possible. We all want it to go for as long as possible too. But yeah, different shows, different methods of, and I think this is what last thing I'll say is the writers were telling me about even Kiefer Sutherland the first time around he wanted to know, and I think everyone wants to know, like, what's my arc, but eventually things, this being TV, and sometimes the writers, they just don't know. This is a great thing for an actor, you always just have to play the truth of what's on the page. Yeah. So even if you are bad, and know it.
Right.
Like in Flash, I knew what was coming 8 episodes later, but I can't tip my hat to that at all.
Yeah.
I might be able to, I tried to, like, sprinkle in little looks or little clues. If you go back, you might be able to say, oh yeah, there's a little Easter egg. But really, you gotta just play the truth of what has been written for you on the page with 100% conviction. Even if the next episode you find out that that was all BS.
Right.
And it's a, you know, it's sort of how it all goes. But I'm good, bad, whatever. And everything in between. I'm very, very grateful. I'm grateful to be sitting here across from you, because this was a film that I got to play a whole bunch of different notes, and you know, with Catherine's brilliant direction, I think we found ourselves in a pretty good place once this thing's all cut together. And we're at Cineplex.
I know. We're about to premiere.
We're here. Yeah.
Yeah, we're premiere.
We made it. Yeah, we're at premiere.
Well, best of luck with that and with the
Thanks very
film
much.
going forward.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for talking to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.